Allow me to portray an image of my youth to you. A young girl with greasy blonde hair, knobby knees, and budding acne sits in her grandpa's fishing boat. The grandpa is white-haired, with deep creases carving his features to a mask of age. The pair sit in the bobbing boat, grandfather casting his line, granddaughter playing Sudoku, and enjoying the weather. John Fogerty blares from the little wind-up radio on deck of the boat, filling the empty waters of Lake Huron with his soulful voice. The vast Great Lake was devoid of activity on this April day, as it was overcast and not quite summertime yet. However, this was the grandfather's favourite time of year to fish. The aged man took peace in solitude, as long as he had his sidekick and best friend. The man looked at the girl, 14 years old, and smiled warmly. The girl looked back at him, returning his grin with one of her own. The girl knew he was her best friend in the world, and had no problem with that. She lived in a small town off Lake Huron, with less than 3,000 people, and she'd rather spend time with her grandpa than some small town hillbillies. The girl was me, and the man was my grandpa. The radio went to its next song, a simple jazz melody. My grandpa hummed along for a moment, finding a melody, and sang to me. "Prudence, my beautiful Prue, have you got a clue how lovely you are?" I giggled and threw down my book and walked next to Grandpa, perched atop the bow of his boat, like a white seagull, watching over its prey. This was Grandpa's thing, hearing random songs on the radio and making up his own words for whatever he was thinking. I was learning how to keep up. "Papa, my dazzling pop, catch me a fish or I'll blow my top," I sang back to him, sitting next to him on the bow. "Well, first, matey, I've got a great feeling. These walleye don't stand a chance when I grab a pole and help out," he said, nudging me and encouraging me with a warm smile. "Sure," I said, eager to shift my gears into beating my grandpa at being the one to catch our dinner. Grandpa set about setting up my pole and handed it to me like a prized artifact to a museum curator. I took it gratefully, and then Grandpa brought a wiggling worm to me. I ripped it in half and pinched the first half onto the hook. I moved away from Grandpa's favourite perch on the bow and found myself near the stern, looking at the horizon. I cast my line and I flew with the bait into tranquil thought. I thought of my grandpa first, as I saw him cracking into a Heineken and lazily pulling in his line. He was quite old, outliving my grandma by about 10 years. My memories of her were always hazy. Despite pushing 80, my grandpa was very physically active. He served in the Navy in his youth and never lost his love of the water. Grandma and Grandpa met at a dancing competition when he was on shore leave in Miami. The year was 1965. Oh, Prue, she was beautiful. Just like you are, she was dazzling the crowd with a charming dance to a song that bore her namesake, and I knew I had to get in there. Swing dancing was on its way out, but we didn't care. Lily Bell and I were in sync, every move perfectly matching the other. She was electric, and I was the water she coursed through, shocking everyone in the room. Needless to say, we shocked the room when we ended the swing with a fiery kiss, and walked home with a prize of 2 free pie slices at Donna's Pie Shop down the road. Grandma grew up in Miami. Her father was from Havana, but she kept it a secret, because back then, people didn't take too kindly to Cubans. She led me around the city like a ship captain navigating his favourite harbour, showing me the lights and life. We knew we had to be married, so we ran away back to my hometown in Michigan, and we were wed in no time. She wasn't much for a small life, but she put up with it for me. I returned to the Navy, finished my time, and came home to her. We raised our family here, love growing every day. What they don't tell you about love is that it has no end. Her and I would dance away the night to her favourite song, and I would sing into her ear Lily Bell, oh Lily Bell. Grandpa would trail off every time to a song, sometimes with tears falling down his wrinkled cheeks. My mind emerged from the depths of Lake Huron with a slash as my rod jolted in my hand. I had a bite. I began to reel and called out to Grandpa. "I got a bite!" I said excitedly. "Reel her in," Grandpa responded with glee. The bite snagged and tore, pulling and prodding. Finally, I saw the bobber drawing near and pop out of the water. What was on the hook was not a fish, but a glass bottle with a wax-covered cork and a piece of parchment inside. I swung the bottle into the boat, and in doing so, it broke up when it made contact with the deck. Grandpa instructed to stay still while he cleaned the glass. He carefully pulled out the paper and handed it to me. "Maybe it's a treasure map. Read me what it says," he said gruffly as he cleaned. I took in the parchment, as it was clearly aged and had very old ink on it. It was indeed a map, but of the stars. It was a star map to something on Lake Huron, and at the bottom it read, Noyer l'écrit. I was taking French classes at the time, as it was one of the more popular languages in my state, so I could roughly translate it to my grandpa. "It means to drown out the cry, and it looks like some kind of map of the stars," I said, handing him the parchment. "Well, seems like a great catch to me, first mate. How about I buy it off you? Name your price," Grandpa said with a laugh. "Cheeseburgers and a shake," I said, giggling as I handed him the map. "Deal," he said, taking my hand and shaking it firmly with his calloused, ship-worn hands. We began packing up the ship, getting ready to return to shore. The name of the ship reflected the sunshine brightly, creating a mosaic on the water. Mrs. Lily Bell, Forrester, glinted softly in the sunlight, carrying my grandma's name into the realm of the water. As Grandpa lugged the antique anchor aboard the hull, grunted, then paused, as a noise rang across the water. "Lily Bell, oh Lily Bell," a young woman sang across the water. "Impossible," Grandpa said, freezing up. I walked over cautiously as I looked to the sky, which was darkening rapidly before us. He closed his eyes and began to dance to the music, humming along to the voice. "Oh Lily Bell," they sang together as my grandpa swayed to the music. I looked to the sky above to see the sun had swiftly retreated and the sky was dark. "Grandpa, we need to go," I shouted, breaking him from his trance. He looked shamefully at me before getting behind the wheel to the boat and leading us home. Grandpa was a rare sailor who could guide you home on a stormy night with no navigation whatsoever. He always knew the way. We arrived at our small cabin by the water, and Grandpa guided the boat into our boathouse, which housed his personal apartment and room above it. He lived here, near his boat, while my mother and I lived in the cabin. "Go inside, Prue. I'll see you in the morning," Grandpa said quietly, walking to the dock that spread before his boathouse. I did as he told me and entered my home. Mum was sitting in front of the fire, knitting, and she regarded me before chiming in. "You two were out late. Did you catch anything?" she asked cheerily. I then remembered the parchment. I decided that was on a need-to-know basis. "No," I said somberly, climbing up the ladder to my loft bedroom, which had a porthole window overlooking the dock. There he was, watching the waves of Great Lake Huron, staring at the paper. I cracked the window so I could feel the lake air as I slept, and I heard the low singing again. "Lily Bell," the voice sang out. Grandpa's head bobbed to the song, and I knew he must have been crying. I drifted off to sleep with the crooning in the distance and the mist of the lake wrapping me in its embrace, like a mournful embrace carrying me to dreamland. I awoke to robins chirping and crickets calling. I looked out my window to see my grandpa had fallen asleep on the dock. I went down to the kitchen where my mum was making breakfast. The savoury scent of bacon and eggs filled my senses with vigour as my mum spoke. Go wake up Grandpa and haul that sailor in for rations, she gestured at me, smiling warmly. I nodded and set outside to wake him. I approached him and jostled him to reality. Grandpa, Mum made breakfast, I said quietly, as his bright blue eyes cracked open, revealing how bloodshot they were. I'll pass, he said quietly before clambering to his feet and entering his boathouse. I followed him in and watched him. Gotta go out today, Prue. Alone. I'll see you for dinner. We'll get those burgers I owe you, he said, smiling at me, turning on the motor and guiding the boat out of the boathouse. I watched him fade into the sunrise, studying the map. I knew he was going to try and find the voice. I went back inside and ate a quiet breakfast with Mum. Did Grandma sing too? I asked quietly, as Mum chewed some bacon. She finished her bite and spoke. Yes, she sang at my wedding. I have a tape. Want to watch after breakfast? I nodded quickly. Mum popped the ancient VHS tape into the player, and I saw my parents' wedding before me. My rugged and handsome father danced with my black-haired beauty of a mother. Grandfather danced with my Aunt June behind them, swinging about, and my grandmother stood on a stage, singing before them. Stars shining bright above you, sweet dreams leave all worries behind you. The tape cut off and flashed to Uncle Bob, who was clearly drunk, yelling at Uncle Frank about who caught a bigger fish on some camping trip in '85. The song Grandma sang was different than the one Grandpa was hearing, but definitely the same voice. Grandpa was hearing Grandma sing to him, and that's what he was chasing. I would have assumed Grandpa was finally succumbing to dementia of some kind, but I had been hearing it too. I could only wait for him to return, so I prodded my mum further. Have you ever heard voices on Lake Huron? I asked gently, hoping she wouldn't look at me like I was crazy. Oh, is that urban legend making a comeback? She said with a laugh, ruffling my hair. Yeah, I said with a laugh, looking for more information. Well, when I was in high school, I knew this guy Randy. He and his dad used to boat around and fish quite a bit. Randy wanted more than anything to be the next Mick Jagger, and he'd spend every day he wasn't fishing rattling that guitar around. One day, he and his pop got caught up in a storm, and only his dad came back. He said Randy took them right into the storm. He said he heard a voice singing some kind of song, in Randy's voice, that was surely to be the next big hit. Randy took the helm from his pop and led them right into the storm, where they sank their boat. Randy's dad survived by the grace of God and a big old lake-lining barge. He told everyone it was because when Randy took the helm, he hit him over the head with their tackle box, and it took out his hearing. We all know he was just delusional, though, she said, a little too excited for such a sad story. Wow, that's so sad, I said softly. It's all in the past, but that's why you've got to be careful on the Great Lakes. Something that big is bound to be dangerous, she chided warningly, seeming to remember Grandpa was out on that very lake. I hope he comes back soon, she said sadly, sobered by the thought of losing him. Grandpa did come back at dusk, and he held true to his word, packing Mum and I into his beat-up pickup truck and taking us to Debbie's diner for dinner. You ladies order whatever you want, on Grandpa, Grandpa said cheerily, slapping his menu down on the table and laughing. Catch any fish today? Mum asked him joyfully, cracking her worn fingers with each other as they interlaced. No, I was just looking for something, Grandpa said wearily, losing his focus as he stared to the waterline of Lake Huron. You could see from the tiny lakeside diner. The diner was the exact hometown diner you could find in any great lakeside town in Michigan. The only thing that ever changed in these nautical-themed diners was which lake it sat on. We enjoyed a filling meal together, and in no time, I was falling asleep in the truck as Grandpa drove us home. He must have carried me inside, because I awoke sometime around 3 a.m. on our couch. When I woke, I felt like a fish gasping for air, as I had been having an awful nightmare about drowning in the icy waters of the lake. I clambered off of the couch and to the kitchen, frantically pouring a glass of water and chugging it like it was my life force. I set the cup in the sink and made my way up the ladder into my room. As I crawled into my bed, my eyes caught something out of the porthole window. It was my grandpa dancing along the dock with a ghostly apparition as his partner. I could see them both moving their mouths, so I cracked open the window to hear. They were singing that song. I slammed the window shut, and the noise drew their gazes to me. The apparition dissipated immediately, and Grandpa looked grief-stricken. He soberly walked into his boathouse. I laid back into the bed, feeling strangely ashamed of interrupting his happiness. Soon, I had drifted off again. I awoke again to the sounds of the boathouse doors opening, and my grandpa preparing for another excursion. I had a pit in my stomach at the thought of him going out there alone. It must have been days since he slept. I grabbed a bag and filled it with the essentials for my mission: my Walkman, a Sudoku book, and a flashlight. I was going to hide in his cargo hold. I snuck down the ladder, averting my nosy mother, and slinked silently out of the front door. I quietly approached the boathouse and looked for Grandpa. It seemed like he was upstairs, probably packing his own bag. I slinked onto the boat and carefully pried open the latch to the cargo hold, which wasn't even big enough to stand up in. It was only big enough for equipment, but when I lay down in it, I was small enough. I made myself comfortable, plugged my Walkman in, and started a game of Sudoku. I felt the boat rock as Grandpa came aboard, and I felt it come to life. In no time at all, we were off, my grandpa and his little stowaway. It wasn't long before I lost track of time and drifted off in the cosy cargo cabin. I didn't awake until the boat rocked viciously and brought me to life. I jolted up, pulling my Walkman headphones around to my neck, and that's when I heard it. The song was so loud now it was rocking the boat, threatening to capsize it. I used all of my weight to knock the latch open and scamper aboard. When I came aboard, I saw my grandpa standing at the bow, staring into a massive storm, circling around a small island, decorated with various shipwrecks. From a glance, I could see a pirate ship, Native American canoes, a B-52 bomber, and a modern lake-lining barge. In the centre of the island was a serpentine woman with glowing yellow eyes, slits like snakes for eyes, and a mouth bellowing out a song, and as the sound entered my ears, I was gone. Allow me to portray an image of my youth to you. A young girl with greasy blonde hair, knobby knees, and budding acne sits in her grandpa's fishing boat. The grandpa is white-haired, with deep creases carving his features to a mask of age. The pair sit in the bobbing boat, grandfather casting his line, granddaughter playing Sudoku and enjoying the weather. John Fogerty blares from the little wind-up radio on deck of the boat, filling the empty waters of Lake Huron with his soulful voice. The vast Great Lake was devoid of activity on this April day, as it was overcast and not quite summertime yet. However, this was grandfather's favourite time of year to fish. The aged man took peace in solitude, as long as he had his sidekick and best friend. The man looked at the girl, 14 years old, and smiled warmly. The girl looked back at him, returning his grin with one of her own. The girl was me, and the man was my grandpa. The radio went to its next song, a simple jazz melody. My grandpa hummed along for a moment, finding a melody, and sang to me, "Prudence, my beautiful Prue, have you got a clue how lovely you are?" "Grandpa, something is wrong." "There was a storm," I said, confusion heavy in my voice. "Oh, Prudence, my beautiful Prue." Grandpa continued to sing loudly, drowning out my suspicions. I looked down and saw there was a Walkman around my neck. I popped the headphones on and cranked up the music, and I was back. Back in the storm, back on the boat heading straight to crash into the island. I looked to Grandpa, arms out and open, ready to embrace his end. I saw the creature looking at me angrily as it dove into the water before me and began swimming horrifyingly fast. I ran to the steering wheel and threw my weight on it, praying to God I could turn the boat, or at least divert past the island. Grandpa looked like he was snarling as he dove towards me. I noticed the note in his hands, the star map. That's how he found this place. That thing must have sent the note to us, luring in more prey. This was all planned. Eyes darting around, I looked for something to slow Grandpa down. I saw our rods in the carrier and I knew what I had to do. I grabbed his fishing rod, taking my hands off the wheel for a moment, and jabbed it into his gut, winding him. I then spotted a cooler behind me and launched it at him, knocking him over and giving me time to save us. The boat groaned as it turned rapidly, on course to miss the island and avoid the crash. I smiled briefly before I felt the boat rock as something came aboard. She was massive, 15 feet long, and a sea blue colour. She had gills and long black, matted hair. Her face was similar to that of a snake, slits for eyes and slits for a nose. Her teeth were yellow fangs, gnashing at me as she slid towards me. She slammed into me, and my headphones fell off my head. I hit my head on the railing and laid disoriented, vaguely taking in that she was no longer singing, but growling. Grandpa was awakened from whatever spell he was under, and I watched him pull out a pocket knife and glance at me mournfully. "Get home safe, first matey. Grandpa loves you," he said before tackling the creature with all of his force and shoving the knife into its neck. The two flailed as they went overboard, sinking into the depths of Lake Huron. I screamed and wailed, letting the boat drift for a while before getting my wits about me. There was no use letting it end here. If I did, Grandpa's sacrifice would have been for nothing. I guided the boat as best as I could until the stars washed over the sky like a cosy wool blanket, putting Lake Huron to bed. I stood at the bow and let out a mournful, desperate plea to whatever was listening. "Please, help! I don't know the way back," I let out. It was then I saw a star flash above me, like when Grandpa would flicker the light on the porch to let me know it was time to come in. I rushed to the wheel and turned the boat to rush to the star, when I saw another flicker, then another. The lights were either guiding me home or to a watery grave with Grandpa. I took my chances and followed. "Prudence," I heard a wind-cracked voice of a man call, as the familiar green light of our boathouse flickered for me, signalling a safe arrival. Mum was practically hysterical when she found me. She pulled me into her chest and sobbed viciously. Mum had reported us missing, but somehow I slipped right by the Coast Guard on my way back. My story was that my grandpa fell overboard, and I couldn't save him. I told Mum I was worried about his health, and that's why I was with him. The days following were filled with midnight trips to the boat, running my hands along the white paint and pressing my face into the jacket Grandpa had left behind, wishing it was his chest, with his big arms around me. A week later was Grandpa's memorial, and I was surprised when an aged man approached me. He resembled a gnarled root, with his dark, worn and wrinkled skin. I noticed an old fisherman's hat obscuring a hearing aid. He reached a wood-like hand out to my shoulder and spoke in a soft, trembling tone. "I saw it too. It took my son. It's a miracle you survived." With that, I melted into the man's arms, racked with sobs. To hear that I wasn't crazy, and to be validated in my experience, lifted this immeasurable weight from my shoulders while simultaneously filling me with dread. My validation had come with the horror of realizing that the world was not as I had previously perceived it to be. Before I knew it, I was back in my bed, crying my eyes red. It was then I heard singing emanating from the distance, just as I had before. I shot up and stared out of the window, mouth agape. There was a ghostly pair of dancers, swinging to Lily Bell, and laughing loudly. I knew in my heart this was not the doing of the Siren. I knew this was a goodbye from a pair of lovers, truly at peace, and dancing their way into the great beyond, as though they were back in 1965. Lily Bell,